and then it will be one by one. It's live, it seems. Yes. So, good afternoon and welcome to this Connect University Autumn School session on online platform ecosystem. Today, we will have the pleasure to talk about language technologies beyond digital products. If you have questions, please join Slido using the hashtag language technologies. If you want to share any insight on social media, please use the hashtag Connect University. The session will be recorded and will be available on the Digital EU YouTube channel and Futurium. Links will be added in the chat. Tomorrow, tomorrow morning, the session will be on algorithmic transparency. And tomorrow afternoon, the session will be on disinformation. But now, language technologies. Language technologies are digital tools processing the human language. To be efficient, they need to incorporate the knowledge contained in an extensive amount of language data, text or speech, used for their training. This knowledge can be used in various ways for various applications, translation, text analysis, but also chatbot like ChatGPT, which can reproduce so far imperfectly the knowledge acquired during their training. We wanted this autumn session to shed light on not only the available online platforms delivering language technologies, but also the future steps we are envisaging to have a truly European ecosystem of language technology solutions, made in Europe for Europe. For that reason, we have an extremely packed program. Our DGT colleague will present the existing e-translation and other language tool that has been developed recently. They will also present AI at EC, an internal endeavor synchronizing the knowledge and need around AI and focusing so far on language technologies. We will then have the opportunity to present the European language data space, its underlying concept, its implementation plan, and timeline. Finally, but not the least, our colleague from the French Ministry will present the current plan for the Alliance for Language Technologies. I already present my excuses to the speakers for the sharp clock keeping I will need to show. But without any further delay, let me introduce the first speaker. Marcus Forti is the team leader of e-translation, the machine translation service provided by the European Commission. He is working within the Direction General of Translation, and his team, beyond continuously improving e-translation, they are also exploring, developing, and deploying some of the many AI opportunities opening up, and that can be used to help EU officials communicate more efficiently. I hope that these available services will have no secret anymore for you after his presentation. Marcus, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Philippe. It's a pleasure to be here. Let me begin my presentation. So thank you for that introduction. As Philippe said, I'm from the Director General for Translation. I did start as a translator, um, and we often used to get the question, a little less nowadays, but translators, I mean, that's people sitting in front of a computer, sitting in front of a typewriter. In the past, what have they got to do with this technology side? In fact, we've always been very focused on the technologies that we could use to translate better. Uh, Back in the day, back in the 60s and 70s, before my time, that meant a dictaphone, that meant a typing pool. But then it started to mean databases, terminological databases. And as far back as 1975, DGT did work with machine translation. Now, that was very, very different to what we know today. It would look primitive compared to the results that we get nowadays. But the approach that was taken was the natural one, which was you would think naively that what you have to teach a computer is grammar And what you have to teach a computer is vocabulary, and then you can move forward, it will learn the language, and you've got it. Now that does work. That's what was attempted. It takes a lot of effort. All of you who've learned another language know that when you're in language classes, you're coming upon exception following exception. Why is it like this? Well, it's just usage. So you set out upon coding a language for a computer, and it's a never-ending task. It was something that DGT did from 1975 to 1998. In that time, we devised 28 language pairs with this rule-based system. But well, I guess at the turn of the century, everything changed and things moved to a data-driven approach. So we built something using the history of translations that we have, that we hold on behalf of all the EU institutions, called MT@EC. That started with all EU languages right off the bat. And it was a statistical method. So you fed in all of the translations to the system, and it broke it down statistically to say, well, this phrase is usually translated as this phrase, so let's try. And it would try to put the translation back together through puzzle pieces of text, if you wish. And it was groundbreaking at the time. We launched in 2013. It was interesting enough that when the Connecting Europe facility launched, we had discussions with DG Connect, and we ended up partnering under the Connecting Europe facility in the e-translation building block. In fact, a short 4 years after the launch of MT@EC, we went for e-translation, which marked again a huge shift in technology that quickly. This was called neural machine translation. We covered all EU languages from and including Icelandic and Norwegian because they were members of the Connecting Europe facility. Neural machine translation was still a mathematical method, but the connections between words and phrases and subwords, so pieces of words, were defined very differently. I don't know if there's any mathematicians in the audience, but we talk about multi-dimensional vector space. You don't need to worry about that if it's outside your field of expertise. That evolved, we could see it evolving as we had the system available. It evolved into what are called transformer models. I used to end this slide here. I used to say, well, we've seen that the field evolves ever more quickly, but we don't know what's coming next. We're not sure where to go, and we're not sure what will happen. Now we do with ChatGPT, with all of these generative models that my colleague Christian will dig into later. So the future is exciting, and we'll see what it brings. Now, e-translation, as it started, built on 2 decades of translators' work internally. That's over 1.5 billion sentences, and we generate 300,000 new sentences every day. So we're very lucky to sit on this treasure trove of translation data, of high quality translation data. The system looks like this. Standard sort of interface that you have nowadays. Text entry box, text results box. Nothing too dramatic there. Since language is very important to us as translators, we have made sure to include versions in all the languages, all the EU languages. Can be used to translate short texts. There's 32 languages. The 32 languages are all the EU official languages, of course, and then a number of languages that Philippe can correct my phrase if I'm remembering it incorrectly, but it was the socially and economically important languages as defined in a CEF survey. So those are Arabic, Chinese, Japanese, Russian, Icelandic and Norwegian because they are the CEF languages, Chinese, Russian, and a couple more. You can see them on the box there. Now, something that differentiates us from the systems that you commonly find online now is that it's very easy to work with documents. And if you submit a Word document, you will get a Word document back. If you submit a PDF, you'll get a Word document back so you can make corrections. If you submit an Excel file, you'll get an Excel file back, and you can submit several documents at a time, ask for a translation into several languages at a time, and get them all back in one shot. Now, that worked very well, but all of you, I think, know that the documents that we draft in our professional lives at the Commission, at the EU institutions, they use a special sort of language. It's not what people use when they're speaking amongst themselves. It's not what you see when you're writing in the press. So there was a big effort within the Connecting Europe facility to gather data from the member states. One of these was the European Language Resource Coordination, which is still running, which still has a database of resources that anyone can download available. Another CEF Connecting Europe facility funded project was Paracrawl, which did web crawling to get more data, parallel language data. And there's also an open source effort called Opus, which actually includes Paracrawl now, and it's much larger than Paracrawl. It gathers everything that it can find. That might sound great. It is good because it's very different from what we usually have. But it has an issue in that, for example, if you take Wikipedia and you take a singer who is very popular, say in the south of Italy, if you look in the Italian Wikipedia, you might find a nice article on that person. But if you switch even to English, you'll probably just find singer popular in southern Italy. And if you switch to Chinese, you'll probably find nothing. So it's not very easy to find fully parallel data that is really a translation. But this was very important for us. It was very important because of DG Connect's goal to make what had started as MTIDC something which was more useful for Europe as a whole. And that meant that we had to move away from this sort of formal type of speech that we always have to what we call general text. So we have a number of domains. So you choose the domain that you want to use, because nowadays there's no best machine translation. There's actually a lot of good machine translation or usable machine translation, but depending on whether you're doing a legal text or subtitles or cheating on your homework, you'll want to use something different and you'll get different results. Our domains, well, I did mention that we started with EU formal language. It's what our translators use in their work because it's been fed with old laws, with old documents, with old citizen complaints, all sorts of things. The next one that we went for was what we call now general text. And this used the other data sources that I mentioned, the ELRC data, the Paracrawl data, the Opus, open source data. That's what you would use for more standard sort of writing. There are others which are much more, a little bit niche, but depending on your field of activity or your field of study, they could be useful. One is Court of Justice case law. So this is the European Court of Justice, and together with them, we built a special engine built only on their data, and that handles the sort of really legalistic language that you would want in that environment. Another one that we're particularly proud of is finance. The reason we're proud of that is because it was built in collaboration with the ECB, so the European Central Bank, and the national central banks. So the ECB gathered data from them, collected it, delivered it to us, and we built engines that they can use. If you want to use e-translation, you do have to register. We don't have quite the capacity to serve the whole world. There's a registration page using your email address, and as is our want, it's available in all the EU languages, depending on what your browser is set on. We built on that success. E-translation is not only for people, it's used on websites as well. It's used on things that crawl the web, for sentiment analysis and so on. It's used in public consultations within the EU institutions. It was used in a site called Reopen EU that gathered the COVID information when there were travel restrictions in place. It's also used on this website of the presidency of the European Union, with the Spanish presidency here being an example. You can see that they've translated their official languages along with English and French, but all of the other languages they use e-translation for. It's also used on Commission websites. We're very touchy about language as translators, so we always put the disclaimer in front of our users the first time they use machine translation to say, be careful, this is machine translation, it may not be perfect. What is different about that is that we put it right there that people have to see it, because we're cautious, because we're a public institution. But if you go and scroll through the lengthy terms and conditions of Google Translate or DeepL, you'll find a clause down there as well that says this is machine translation, we don't know if it's perfect, and so on. From that, we did a springboard into a whole series of other tools. I'll go through them just quickly as a presentation. They're all available within the EU for people who have registered. One is a summarization tool, speech to text, and various different NLP tools, from things that are niche to things that are quite attractive. They all follow the same sort of visual identity. E-summary, you submit a long document and you will get back a short document, a short summary of that. In our context, it's seen as something desk officers can use because they often receive emails from citizens or from national bodies with long attachments. They may not even know the language. They can submit it and they can say, what's this about? Who do I have to talk to get a proper answer about this? These are the more niche ones: anonymization support, classification, named entity recognition. Named entity recognition is very useful, but very technical for people who want to do document analysis, the number of words that you see, the number of nouns, how many proper nouns, that sort of thing. Classification is as well something for archivists who need to know that the document, according to the Eurovoc classification, for those of you who know what that is it technical, is it legal, and so on, with many subcategories. But something I think that is easier to think about and is another Connecting Europe facility success story is the anonymization support. So here we didn't develop something specifically. We took on a tool that was developed under a CEF grant called MAPA, Multilingual Anonymization for Public Administrations. It's still available as open source if you find that it might be useful for you. But we wrapped it to make it available as a service. So through the web page that I showed you, you can submit documents and you have a couple of choices. You have the original on the left here. You can ask to replace identifiable information with something fictitious. So you see that 5th of April 2019 has become 18th of February 2015 in the second one. Or you can obfuscate it. You can black it out, redact it if you wish. And here you see that black bars have been placed over the identifiable information. Now again, as with all tools, it's not perfect. You can see that it does say that it's still the European Commission here, and it does identify the Secretariat at the steering level of monitoring group. So it's not perfect. And that's the reason that we called it anonymization support. We had a big discussion with the data protection officer who did not like our original name, which was simply anonymization, because there's no guarantee it's perfect. So they wanted to emphasize the fact that actually, as with all the other tools, the end user is the one who has the responsibility. They have to go through it, check to see, is this what I wanted? Another one that we have is speech transcription. They always follow the same pattern. you upload your file, and here we're talking about movie files, we're talking about sound files, and you get transcriptions of that text. Now, we started that by using other people's services. We didn't build one from scratch. There was Microsoft service available. Then we used open source models, which is what we use now. But our real niche here, we think, is to look at languages that do not have much commercial interest for the big players. Right now, we're focusing on Lithuanian. It's a language with 3 million speakers, more or less. Uh, the broadcasting body gave us 1,000 hours of recordings. And with that, we're moving towards releasing a tuned engine, which will be better than basic open source engines, and which we will make available as open source to provide support for these languages, because in the European context, the number of speakers of the language is not what we consider important. It's the role of that language as a national language, as a cultural language that we want to support. So that's the range of the services that we have now. We are, of course, or we were quite shaken up by the AI revolution at the end of last year with the release of ChatGPT, but we've reacted quite quickly, and we can discuss the tools that we have and then move on to that topic. So thank you. If you have
Thank
any
you.
questions, of course,
Thank
I'm
you a lot,
happy to
Marcus.
take them.
There is at least one very interesting question, if I may, is have you seen any difference in translation data today to the one you had 10 years ago?
Okay, that's a question that I haven't heard it formulated that way before. I would say we have not, because we're very codified at in the institutions. So we have a interinstitutional style guide, which, if I remember, it's coming on to 300 pages long, that sets out you must say this, you must not say that, and so on. But it is something that we're very aware of, especially with data coming from others. The, the thing that concerns translators is precisely that, is that by working from a machine translation original, it can kill the creativity a bit and shape the final output in a way that that is not what you would spontaneously have said. So there is that fear. Um, I have not really seen it in the data that we work with, but I have heard the complaint from translators. So there is that sort of potential influence of machine output on human language production, on human thought. How widespread that would be, I don't know. I mean, I don't think machine translation has the huge impact that, say, Twitter has right now, or that the internet had with people using LOL and FOMO, fear of missing out, and all those things, which have come from another technological arena. But yeah, I can't give you a precise answer, but it's an
No, no.
interesting topic, let's say.
Thanks a lot, Marcus. I have another easier question, actually. Which of the domain got more usage hits? Legal,
The
financial, and domain. Do you know what are the most useful
I
domain?
could actually look up the figures, but I would have to, that would take away from this presentation. I know the general tendency. We had the same questions inside, of course, and originally it was EU formal language, which was our flagship, and it was the most used. Now that's going to happen automatically at the beginning, because the main user base at the beginning are all the translators in the institutions and people working in the institutions. So that was true until about 2 years ago. But then general text took over, because e-translation started to be used by a much broader user base. And that user base wanted it for web pages, it wanted it for the COVID page, it wanted it for even citizens' letters inside the European Commission. If we receive a citizen's letter, they're not writing in the EU formal style. So it's much better to have general text. So I pulled those figures, and it was something like, oh, okay, I know this will be recorded, but it's a little bit off the top of my head.
Okay.
40% general text, something like 30% EU formal language, and then the other ones are much, much smaller
Mhm.
because they really are, they serve a specific purpose. It would be really surprising if the others were more important than those two.
Marcus, I have a last question, which is a very nasty one, but which was asked at the majority of people. So I have to ask you, and you know which one it is. It's always the same question. Will this tool eventually replace human translator in our services?
Wow. Yeah, that's always a tough
That's
one to
always the same
discuss.
question.
We do think about it a lot.
Yeah.
My view, so in our services, we have a very specific role. And if the question was specifically in our services, that fits this. It's that we have to translate legislation. Machine translation is not perfect, and the machine is not responsible for what it outputs. So the role of the translator may change. It may change to becoming a sort of certifier and corrector of the machine translation output. And we're not even there yet because they use machine translation in about 20% of the text that they get. They use about 40% from historical texts, because our texts are always, this refers to the previous one, right? So it's quoting it and so on. And 30% is really just different and spontaneous. So they tend to want to be creative with that. But I think over time, the importance of the responsibility and the certification of a proper translation will become much more important. And then I think the field of artistic translation, so novels and so on, will probably continue to be dominated by humans because it's about enjoying the word and about writing it so there is suspense and so on. But things like restaurant menus and tour guides, all that sort of stuff where you'd find a student or your little cousin who's studying English or whatever to translate it, I think that will go. I think that will go over time. So
Thanks a lot, Marcus. Thanks a lot for the presentation and answering the question.
pleasure. Thanks.
Now, without any further delay, let me introduce the next speaker, Christian Brazoveanu. Oh, I miss it. I'm sorry. Brazoveanu is also a former colleague of us from DG Connect, and is what I'm calling transfuge in the in the DGT colleagues. So much we miss you in our side, and I know that you are really great on the other side. Christian is a member of the translation team and leads the e-translation project aiming with Euro HPC to develop new advanced AI models for Europe. He's keen on opening new paths of AI exploration for very concrete practical use case at the Commission, and is also the coordinator of the new Commission internal AI at EC network, a broad AI-oriented community of both users and technical experts that he has got to present us in more detail. Christian, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Philippe. I hope you can see me and hear me okay. And I've also prepared a few slides to share with you. I hope they become visible.
Yes, we see it. We see the first
Okay,
slide.
thank you. So hello,
And the second.
everybody. As Philippe mentioned, one of my main roles is the coordinator of the internal AITC network at the Commission, which is part of a broader AITC initiative that has different dimensions, both about technology and governance. The AITC network part is very much focused on the practical, concrete applications. And it is this community of both users and technical experts, and trying to facilitate and encourage some new explorations for some new AI projects and potentially new services in the future. It started small. Actually, it was initially just a local community at the DGT level, but it went well, so we proposed to transform it into a commission level community, and it has grown significantly, which of course has brought challenges as well. but it has been quite active, and it has, I think, contributed quite a lot to more awareness of what different explorations and projects we already have inside the Commission in different parts of the Commission, because as you know, it is a big organization, or rather collection of organizations, some would say. And we have had some interesting new ideas for what other explorations and use cases would be particularly valuable for the Commission. It has three main action strands. The primary objective is eventually to end up with really hard projects, in the sense of facilitating some really hands-on concrete explorations. But you cannot do that, especially not with AI technology, especially not with the current ones, without first trying to identify opportunities and use cases. As someone said in an article famously, AI is not IT, so it's quite difficult to plan in the same way. And of course, in the more broader sense, it is important to build and share business knowledge in this area, because we have had various systems for a while. But as we all know, this AI label is a moving target, and what was cutting edge AI technology 2 years ago now may not be exactly at the same level as we see today. At DGT level, we started with a number of explorations that were in some areas that were more specifically about DGT, and others that were broader. And Marcus has already mentioned the one that has already become a full service in the meantime, and that was the one for summarization. Others may be a little bit more obscure for in particular non-DGT audiences, like, for example, evaluation sampling. This refers to the sampling that we do for freelance translations, outsourced translations, for when they come back and there is a quality assessment. Others are, as you can see, they are quite broad. Semantic similarity now is an approach that is essentially built into almost every AI application we see today. Assisted editing, again, is a broad reference to various ways of improving a piece of text. And then we have terminology extraction as well, which is very important in DGT, but can also have a broader application in other areas as well. And while we were happily playing with our little models and experiments, the world exploded a little bit in terms of model size. And of course, we started to explore as well the potential of the new wave of generative AI and large language models. And that was, of course, limited by what is available internally. And I think it's the same for every organization. We are not an organization that would use directly ChatGPT or OpenAI servers in the same way as we don't use Google Translate directly with internal information. So the exploration started with what was available in particular in AWS and in the Microsoft Azure cloud, where there are GPT models available, but also the Claude models, including the Claude 2 model. And the very first explorations we have seen involved setting up experimental environments. And this is just one example that we started with at DGT, where we just wanted to give an environment to colleagues to explore themselves directly the new art of so-called prompt engineering, or AI psychology, as others call it. So it's a very simple environment just to learn how to talk to these models, to get them to do what you want. And then there came the focus more on specific use cases, and internally in a political organization, public sector organization, governmental organization like the Commission, and at national government level as well. One of the main documents that you have to produce all the time are briefings for policy issues or for meetings and other events. And we, in particular for this exploration in the ITC network, we decided to try that first. We just try to take the step beyond the simple access to the model and the chatbot general access style to try to give an anchor to our colleagues for a very specific end use case. So we set up another experimental environment to predefine it already a bit for this specific use case, and we enabled them to use some input documents and some topics and generate the first draft for what is called a policy briefing, which contains, some key points, some questions and answers, and some background. And we have an internal group of explorers focusing in particular on the instructions to try to get as much as the best possible output. After this exploration, of course, this is aimed at eventually becoming a full service, and that can become broadly available. This is just one of the most mentioned use cases. There are, and it can be the same also for other similar documents, not just for briefing, but then there are others that are very important, and we are prioritizing and exploring. Just to give a few mentions, in particular relevant in the context of language technology, there is a lot of interest and already quite a bit of exploration for linguistic revision or editing, including for accessibility purposes. And then there are other use cases that focus on more complex analysis and assessment. But of course, the technical capabilities are only part of the picture. I'm not even sure if we can say half of the picture, maybe even less than half of the picture. As we all know, there are very, very serious questions and issues to be taken into account to ensure what we call lawful, safe, and trustworthy AI. And that is what the EU aims to achieve through the AI Act that is coming, and also other measures. So the AI Act, as many of you may already know, will bring a framework for that based on different levels of risk and a number of requirements that are specific to each risk level. And you may have seen this recent Stanford, well, not so recent anymore, an assessment of all the models, proprietary and open or semi-open models out there available, at least at the time of this little quick study, showing that if the AI Act was in force today, essentially none of them would comply with the requirements. Of course, the AI Act is not today in force, so they still have time, and I assume they are working very hard to do that, but there are some serious concerns we need to take into account. And our colleagues at the Council of the European Union also looked more specifically at risks of applications and models like ChatGPT and related models specifically in the public sector. And there we have a number of specific risks, but I would highlight in particular a few, in particular the one referring to citizens' involvement and trust. This is more like for the technology because, there's the concern about, false information, what is called hallucinations in technical terms. But then there are others that are not necessarily technological impediments or problems, like serving the public interest, the reference to private influence detected. In the case of ChatGPT and other models that are provided by private players like that, there may be a concern about private influence, but we have seen concerns also about political influence in models that come from parts of the world that have certain political biases, let's say. And then there is a lot of concern, and we have seen it in practice actually, when it comes to efficiency and also to reliability. When something is not under your control, you don't know when you have or you don't have the capacity, at least at this stage. And when you don't know it, with these models in particular, you know that the versions change, and then you have a new version of the model, and suddenly what worked yesterday doesn't work anymore, and the versioning is not under your control. And finally, accountability, very important. there is essentially almost a complete lack of transparency about the training data. You may remember that even some of the open source models in the first version, they did say something about the training data that they used. And then in the second version, they didn't say anything anymore. So we don't know, are they trained with copyright infringement or with other infringements relating to personal data and other data security and privacy rules. And you remember that there have been cases of suspension because of that. So there are a lot of question marks and concerns, and many of them point to one big question that I think, and I see in many presentations and articles and opinions, many organizations asking themselves the question whether they need to have this kind of technology under their control, and that goes not only for a public sector organization like the European Commission or the EU institutions overall, but also for large private companies. So that's why we have also embarked, Philip mentioned in the beginning, we have embarked on this path on exploring the potential to build some new advanced AI models that are in line with EU rules and values, and also facilitating access for Europe to AI power, because we already hear concerns about who will have access to what level of AI power, and I think many are already seeing a new kind of digital divide, this kind of an AI divide emerging that may be a lot more serious than other forms of digital divide. So we are trying to do this by building on existing EU efforts in this area, and this in particular is the Euro HPC program for supercomputing infrastructure in Europe, but also the new plans and the new investment in the new common European data space for language data, and before that the European Language Resources Coordination, so all driven by DG Connect. So these are ingredients that are very important and very valuable in this new field of building these new advanced AI models. So we are about to start a new Euro HPC project on one of the new supercomputers in Euro HPC. This is the Luxina supercomputer in Luxembourg. And we hope to be able as well to scale up and to build on what comes out of the different EU-funded projects, either for building new data sets that are Europeanly safe, if I may put it that way, and also new models, new open source models that come out of European research institutions and other developers. So we hope to build on that and to also contribute with our own data, and then to be able to continue to provide the service in the same way as with e-translation, this time to explore the idea of AI-powered services for Europe that are publicly available. So as Philippe put it, some new AI power that is made in Europe and for Europe. And I stop here, Philip. I hope I didn't take too much time.
Thanks a lot, Christian. No, it's definitely very interesting. And
I hope that the question that I get is not whether this is going to replace all of us, like Marcus got the one about translators.
No, unhappily, it's not in the list. But if you want, you can try to answer that question. That would be very interesting.
Yeah.
No, there are a few questions indeed. One of them is, what would you say is the added value for translation purpose of generative AI interfaces such as ChatGPT compared to online translator services like DeepL?
We have had some explorations relating to translation specifically as well, and what we have seen so far and what comes also out of the research One challenge is that, of course, every time you try to translate the same text, you may get something else. Because even if you put the level of, the so-called temperature or creativity on 0, it may still not be the same, and this may not be good for a lot of scenarios for translation. But the research also shows that this generative AI can be very good evaluator of machine translation. So we have seen quite powerful combination if you have a neural machine translation system and you enhance it with generative AI power to to evaluate and to improve the output of the machine translation system. And actually, it makes sense because if we look at these new models as a kind of proto minds, if you like, I hope I'm not upsetting everybody by personifying them like that. Also, when I worked as a translator, when I was learning a new language, it was much easier for me to judge the output of another translator than to start myself from a blank page. So I think it may be mirroring the human behavior, if you like, since it's trying to mirror the kind of the human thinking. On the other hand, there's also the other aspect, and I think that may have an influence on the range of possibilities for different scenarios. Some use cases, these models are multilingual. That is another issue. It's not necessarily equally multilingual for all the languages, but when you can get an output for certain purposes directly in another language, there is no machine translation involved inside the model. So in those cases, you would ask the question in one language and get a reply in another language. So I think that will not replace translators or machine translation, but I think it will add to the diversity of tools available and possibilities.
Then maybe a last question, Christian. It's a nice one. It's what was in the network the most exciting aspect during the last half year, the last 6 months? What happened that was the most exciting? New product, new service, new ideas, personal.
Well, I think the briefing exploration has been the most exciting because, okay, we did set up an environment initially and we showed it to colleagues to try it for that specific purpose. But then you hear from colleagues trying for something else. And then when you hear them trying for something else, like you maybe had not even thought about it to try it the same way. So it was quite interesting, and also the way in which they, because of course we wouldn't put internal information in ChatGPT, and the e-briefing exploration is not set up for kind of chatbot style interaction. But some colleagues still found a way to use that safe environment that we have in the e-briefing lab to repurpose it for other outputs. It's an exploratory environment, so there are no specific restrictions beyond the kind of the default setup, but it was still very interesting, and I think it will help us a lot because it gives us more examples to create some new applications.
So it's still creating a lot of imagination, a lot of creation, new ideas and the like. It's still boiling, basically, bubbling up. Thanks a lot, Christian.
Thank
And
you.
if I may, we will go to the next speaker, Stelios. Stelios, are you with us? Yes.
Yeah.
Stelios
Hello, everyone.
is the head of natural language processing and language infrastructure department at the Institute for Language and Speech Processing in the Athena Research Center in Greece. He has been involved in a number of initiatives in the area of research infrastructure and in particular language infrastructures of the European Union. He is now leading with the Athena group the technical development of the Common Europe language data space. So he's going to present you what is this Common European language data space. Stelios? The floor
Thank you
is
very much,
yours.
Philippe. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we do.
Okay. Thank you very much for the introduction, Philippe. Good afternoon, everyone. So the purpose of this short presentation is to introduce the Common European Language Data Space. In short, I will be referring to it as LDS, and shed some light on what it is, what the basic principles are, sorry, and what its technical design is expected to look like. But since the Common European Language Data Space is not the result of some sort of parthenogenesis, I will share some background regarding existing platforms and infrastructures that have supported language technologies research and development in Europe in the previous years. And actually, some of these infrastructures have already been mentioned. After this short introduction, I will elaborate on what is different in data spaces and how these differences call for new architectures that we're currently working on. I hope that my slides can. Is it okay? Is
They
this
do.
the same?
Yes, it's okay.
Okay, very good. So it works. So data sharing in Europe and in the world has a rather long history, especially in the language technology field. Starting bottom right on this slide, the European Language Resources Association was established in 1995, almost 30 years ago, essentially as a centralized data center following the terminology of those years. And then if we move counterclockwise, we have Clarin and MetaShare, which were established in the years 2010 and 2012. And later on, bottom left, we established ELRC Share that has already been mentioned by Marcus. Let me spend a minute on MetaShare, Clarin, and ELRC Share. MetaShare was a federated network spread all over Europe with a number of central nodes, let's say, assuming responsibility for different regions in Europe. Clarin has adopted a simpler federation model with a single central node, the so-called virtual language observatory that you see here on the slide, up in the right on the right side, the so-called virtual language observatory that is managed by the Clarin ERIC, the Clarin European Research Infrastructure Consortium, that is the legal entity that is managing, that is coordinating the pan-European Clarin network. And then if we move to bottom left, we have ELRC Share, which bears some commonalities, large technical commonalities with MetaShare, but it was established as a centralized, let's say, platform that was dedicated to machine translation related resources, as this has already been mentioned by my colleague Marcus, and it was targeting some sort of specialized audience, in particular public administrations, for the purposes that Marcus has already mentioned. In the years 19 to 22, we established in Europe the European Language Grid, in short, ELG, and we released the final version of ELG in March 2022. So it is something like 18 months ago. ELG implemented the centralized architecture, offering language data, but also language processing services like machine translation, speech recognition, speech synthesis, and the like. But it also tried to implement functionalities facilitating ELG's vision to act as a hub for language technology in Europe. And to do this, ELG started harvesting and integrating metadata descriptions of what exists, so to say, from a number of repositories, including various Clarin repositories, MetaShare, ELRC Share. There's a Nodo repository that is hosted by CERN, Hugging Face, which specializes in transformer-based models for language technology, and so on and so forth. Just to give an order of magnitude of what ELG offers right now, as of yesterday, if I recall well, this is a screenshot taken yesterday, we offer 8,000 corpora, almost 4,000 tools and services, and almost 3,000, sorry, conceptual resources, and around 500 models and grammars. Now, if this is what exists in Europe so far. Now, if we move to what comes in the future, end of January, February 2023, we started the language data space. The language data space has been initiated by the Commission. It is a procurement action of the European Commission with a budget of 6 million for 36 months. And the option for extension by another 12 months with an additional budget of 2 million. And the objective is to develop and deploy a European data space and marketplace for the collection, creation, sharing, and reuse of multilingual and multimodal language data. And the main, let's say, stakeholders that the language data space wants to serve is first and foremost industry, but also research organizations, public administrations, cultural associations, non-governmental organizations, and so on and so forth. Who implements the language data space? It is a consortium that comprises 4 core partners. DFKI, the German Research Center for Artificial Intelligence in Germany, Athena Research Center, this is the organization where I work for, the European the Evaluations and Language Resources Distribution Agency, in short, ELDA, and Tilde, a language technology company in Latvia. We are helped by 4 additional organizations on a subcontracting basis, 3PC, Capgemini, Clarin, ERIC, and BDVA. And we are also anchored in almost in all member states and associated countries. And we are also helped by legal counselors in France. Now, what is data spaces and what is the relation of data spaces to, and the data spaces concept to the EU data strategy? Data spaces are an inherent part of the EU data strategy, and they aim to act at least as one, if not the only one, operational arm of the data economy in Europe. Now, just to paint the overall picture, we have to mention that there are various data economy and data infrastructure initiatives in Europe with slightly different goals and individual positioning, but with substantial overlaps at the conceptual, technical, legal, and operational level. On the community side, that is outside the European Commission, on the community side, there is the Data Spaces Business Alliance, in short, DSBA, that includes the Gaia-X European Association for Data and Cloud, AISBL. This is the type of legal entity that is running Gaia-X. The Big Data Value Association, in short, BDVA, now I think renamed into DIRO. The Fiveware Foundation and the International Data Spaces Association, in short, known as IDSA. Together, all these organizations, they represent more than 1,000 leading key industry players, associations, research organizations, innovators, policymakers, etc. Not only from Europe, but also from the rest of the world. Now, turning to the initiatives that have been launched by the European Commission, the European Commission has established the Data Spaces Support Center. We will refer to it in short as DSSC, which also includes the DSBA. They have also initiated, the Commission has also initiated Simple, and Simple is the so-called smart middleware that will enable cloud-to-edge federations and support all major data initiatives funded by the European Commission, notably the Common European Data Spaces. And in addition to DSSC and Simple, there are around approximately 20 data spaces that are in preparation status, most of them running their requirements and initial specification tasks. The Common European Language Data Space is one of the approximately 20 official EU data spaces. And as I said before, the main differentiating factor between the Common European Language Data Spaces, the data space, and our past in the language technology field is that we have an almost explicit focus on industry. And I think that this would not be inaccurate to say that it is the case for almost all data spaces. Almost all data spaces focus on what would be called, let's say, B2B, business to business, or B2G, business to government scenarios. Now, talking about the language data space, it is important just to refresh our minds by what we mean with language data. What is our scope? Language data in the language data space world includes text, audio, and video data, what we call multimodal data. It includes language descriptions, grammars, in the very traditional sense that Marcus also mentioned in his introduction, but also language models like those that power ChatGPT, that was also mentioned before. There may also be structured data like machine-readable dictionaries, lexica, ontologies, thesauri, knowledge graphs, you name it. They can be monolingual, they can be multilingual, parallel, they can belong or they can express different domains, health, automotive, agri-food, anything. They can cater for different communication scenarios, dialogue data, web or broadcast data. They may be subtitles, they may be summaries, they may be question answering related data. Of course, they denote facts and events or simply express opinions. And as is the case for all language data, they can be ambiguous. In short, they can simply express all the features of language itself with all ambiguity and variation that language enjoys. Important to note, language data as a concept evolve in the same manner that language technology is evolving. A few years ago, language models had a totally different meaning and use from what is meant by models today. So with all this in mind, we embark on, let's say, building the language data space that will be part of the EU data strategy and will abide with the main principles behind the EU data strategy as it currently stands. And this main principle underlying the concept of data spaces is that of data sovereignty. And we conceive of data sovereignty as the ability of a person, legal or natural, to exclusively and in full power and authority decide on the usage and access of its data as an economic asset. What this entails is that the data spaces, and the LDS in particular, should enable full control of the owner, of the provider of the data, over usage and access to data. It should allow for data transactions, even monetary transactions. It should allow for tracking of data provenance and lineage. and it should enforce policies, standards, rules, contracts, and of course, perform all this, support all this in an environment that is inspired by trust and inspires trust between participants. What is the main component, and what is the, let's say, the prototypical data flow in a data space and in the language data space in particular? The main component and prototypical operation in LDS is that of exchange of information about data and exchange and transfer of data themselves. Exchange that happens between participants that may take the role of providers and consumers, as you see on the left and right side, respectively. Participants in data spaces and in LDS in particular will be technically represented through software artifacts that we call connectors. And this terminology, let's say, of connectors, I think is consistent, at least so far, with the terminology that we use in the wider data space. A connector is the indispensable component for all participants, providers and consumers alike. A connector enables the documentation of language data, the listing, the cataloging of data on offer on the part of the connector owner, part of the data provider, as well as the actual transfer of data from the data source on the left to the data sink of the data consumer on the right. And of course, this transfer of data is executed upon agreements between the two. And as we will see, these agreements take the form of contracts later on. Optionally, and we show this with the dashed arrows, providers and consumers may interact with a central catalog. And it will be this central catalog that will be aggregating what is on offer by all connectors, and it will be allowing search and discovery of data by all consumers. Now, if we extend this interaction scenario from the two connectors to a bit more, which means a bit more participants, we get a network where the nodes, that is the connectors, interact in a federated, almost peer-to-peer fashion. You see here that all the data space connectors can interact with one another. Almost all functionalities reside in the connectors that the providers and the consumers are deploying. So the idea is that there will be this data space connector, this language data space connector software that providers and consumers and whoever wants to join the LDS will need to deploy in their own premises. So all functionalities will reside in the connectors that providers and consumers will be deploying, and these functionalities will provide for describing a connector's own data or describe a connector's own assets, so to say, indicated by the metadata rubric that you see on the slide. They will also provide for crawling metadata of the data residing in the other connectors so that they can enable search and discovery. And this is indicated by the federated crawled metadata tag that you see on each and every connector on this slide. And last but not least, there will also be functionalities that will enable providers and consumers to strike agreements through the so-called contracts, which will be recorded in the clearinghouse of the connectors that are involved in a transaction. In addition to the connectors network, there will be some ancillary, let's say, functionalities that will be provided more or less centrally. And one example of such functionality is what you see here in the center top vocabulary hub. And it is this vocabulary hub through which the LDS, let's say, network will make known the data model that it is using to describe, to model the data that are on offer. An additional functionality that the Vocabulary Hub will be offering is converters. Since we know that there is a multitude of models out there to describe language data, it will be this Vocabulary Hub that will include converters from known schemas to, from known models to the model that the LDS will deploy. Now, again, in a more hybrid scenario, if we take exactly the same architecture as previously, one can imagine that in addition to the federated cataloging, the federated catalogs, the ones that are indicated by federated crawled metadata on the slide, we can imagine an additional central catalog, right? What you see here in green. And this catalog will act as a broker that it will only enhance the visibility and discoverability of what is on offer in the wider data space. It will have nothing else to do with the individual contracts, the individual transactions between connectors. Everything will be, let's say, all these transactions will be kept private between the providers and consumers. Now, thinking of LDS as part of the wider data spaces ecosystem, such a central functionality, what we see here in the green boxes, the LDS catalog and LDS metadata, may prove useful for discovery of LDS assets by other data spaces that may have an interest in discovering data and assets, language-related data and assets coming from other data spaces, the media data space, the health data space, and so on and so forth. Now, talking about other data spaces, let me come back to the Data Spaces Support Center that I mentioned almost at the beginning. In view of the vision to enable the interconnection, to enable crosswalks between data spaces in Europe, for example, as I mentioned before, a crosswalk between the language data space and the media data space, we believe that it is important that the different data space initiatives are in sync. They somehow share the same or similar, so to say, building blocks. And the purpose of this slide is to say that almost all data spaces that are currently in preparation in Europe somehow structure their way of thinking along these two notions, these two blocks, organizational and business building blocks on the one side, where we decide about the rules of participation, the rules of governance, and so on and so forth. And then the blue part is the technical implementation, the technical instruments using which we can enable and implement the three main things of the data spaces world: data interoperability, data sovereignty and trust, and data value creation. I spent quite some time talking about data space connectors, and this was not accidental. You see here on this slide how many functionalities, so to say, are to be provided by the data spaces connectors. So all this is currently under preparation. I have to give to attribute the Data Spaces Support Center for this diagram. This diagram is taken from the Data Spaces Blueprint version 0.5 as of September 2023. So you understand that things are somehow still in preparation, and they're expected to evolve. If you're interested in what LDS is doing, the progress we're making, the events we're organizing, etc. Here is the language data space website hosted under eceuropa.eu. And with this, I thank you very much. I hope I did not exceed the time limit, Philippe. I hope.
No, everything is fine. Thanks a lot, Stelios. A few interesting questions, and I like two of them. I'm going to ask you the two at the same time.
Yeah.
The first one is, what is the most complicated right now in the data spaces? Is it hard to fix? Okay. And it go very well with the other one, which is, I would be interested to see how often the data space participant meets and revise.
Right. The trickiest part right now, which is also the new part, if you want, in the infrastructural world, especially in language technologies, is that of let's say the mechanisms, the automatic mechanisms that will implement the, let's say, the LDS governance scheme. Those mechanisms that will ensure that transactions are kept, let's say, private between participants. This is one thing. Now, the other thing is, which is not part of LDS the way we have conceived of it right now, but it is coming. It is coming. And it has to do with what Christian said before and what Marcus said before. We need to find those simple ways that will allow for the data that reside in the different LDS connectors to be used collectively, okay, but also respecting all values, privacy, etc., to be used collectively for supporting language models. There are technologies, we know some of them, okay, federated learning is one of them, but I mean, this is yet to be decided. Philippe, sorry, what was the second question?
The second one is, how often are the data space participants meeting together and revise?
Well, they are not meeting so far in the sense that the LDS, the pre-deployment version of LDS is scheduled for next July, and this is something that we will discuss with the European Commission. This will be the pre-deployment version, so we expect them to meet. Now, the main point is that the owners will have the right to revise their offers at any point in time. Okay, I mean, almost, I don't know whether the metaphor is right, but it is. I mean, in the data economy, one could easily imagine that there are stock exchange like, let's say, ways of thinking. So it may be that prices or the value in general, okay, goes up as demand increases. So talking about, for instance, access and usage, the owners will have the right to change the access and usage terms at any point, simply because they control everything. They control their data. The data is in their premises. The description of the data are in their premises. They have full control over what they own. Now, how quickly they can meet? We hope that this data economy, this language data economy, will be vibrant enough. I cannot tell you whether it will be 5 or 10 times a day or 5 or 10 times a week right now. We hope that we will be able to ignite, let's say, interest on the part of data providers so that they really engage in the data space and its operations.
Question where I'm asking you the question because it's received to me.
Yeah.
Will the federated service of language data space include large language model based services?
Yeah, I mean, it will certainly include language models. But here I can borrow some of the arguments that Christian mentioned before. It is not as easy as when simply sharing language data. Cataloging language models is something that we will do. I mean, we have already started doing it. Offering language models in a sort of inference decoding mode, the way it is offered by other platforms. Let me not advertise any of a single one of them. Is not part of, at least of our capabilities and our planning right now.
Thank you, Stelios. I'm going to take the opportunity of this last question actually to move to the next presentation. Thanks a lot again, Stelios.
Thank you, Philippe.
So let me introduce the next set of speakers. Thibaut Grouas is the Chief Policy Officer for Language Technology at the French Ministry of Culture. He has been supervising the language technology sector in France for more than a decade, with a strong focus of technology for French and languages of France. Lucie Gianola is a policy officer for language technology in the same service. After some academic experience in NLP, she joined the group. Jocelyn Lecomte is a project manager specializing in public policies and political science for innovation and technology. They work together within the General Delegation for the French language and the languages of France for the promotion of sovereignty, language technology, and linguistic diversity. They will present their effort to ally the member state on building a European language technology ecosystem. Dear colleagues, the floor is yours. And
Thank you so much, Philippe. Do you see my screen sharing?
Yes, and we hear you as well.
Okay, perfect. So we will be doing a team presentation with my two colleagues to present you the Alliance for Language Technologies European Digital Infrastructure Consortium. So we will call this program ALT for Alliance for Language Technologies and EDIC for European Digital Infrastructure Consortium. That will be easier to read. So let's begin with, is my slides moving? Yes. A quick recap on language technologies.
Yes, so we have been talking about language technologies quite extensively since the beginning of the session. Under language technologies, we include any study and development of systems able to process human language. It is something that is often called NLP for natural language processing. By contrast with artificial languages, natural languages are the languages for humans, and artificial languages are the languages that we use for, well, programming languages. And many applications fall under the NLP. Many of those are also categorized under artificial intelligence because the aim is to talk, if we may say, to machines and make machines talk. So examples we have seen today already of NLP are automatic translation, speech recognitions, voice synthesis, information interaction. We also have name entity recognition, automatic text generation, and so on.
Thank you, Lucie. So now back to the edicts. So what are the edicts? The EDIC, so that stands for European Digital Infrastructure Consortiums. There are a new European type of infrastructures which are derived from the ERICs. Stelios have shown an example with the Clarin EDIC. This is an ERIC, and the EDICs are more or less the same as the ERICs, but they are they are focused on the industry, while the ERICs are focused on the research. So the EDICs enforces Digital Decade program and actions. And to submit a new EDIC, you have to get at least 3 member states' commitments and agreements on the project. And when you have sufficient member states initiating an EDIC, then the process is launched by the EU Commissions. And after that, the Commission sets up the EDICs, and then it is financed by its members, its founding members, and it can also gather new members, of course. And of course, the aim of the EDIC is to pool funds from various sources, including European funds. So you will see there are various funding sources. So as regarding the Alliance for Language Technology EDIC, here is the timeline of the project that we are currently coordinating as the French government. So we first of all expressed an expression of interest back in February this year, and showing that a lot of member states were interested in this topic. Then we worked with the member states. We launched a working group to collect various opinions and input from the member states. And we drafted statutes, budget, action, and implementation plan. And we could send a pre-notification to the Commission. It was late in May this year, including most of the documents required for setting up the EDIC. So we continued working on this project, of course, during the summer. It was announced in June during the digital assembly that took place in Stockholm this year. And now we are working on the formal application for the health EDIC. And we would like to apply to this EDIC before the end of October, so before the end of this month. Quite close, actually, because only about 15 days remaining. So as you can guess, we are almost done. We are finalizing the statutes, the budget, and the implementation plan. We already have done most of the work, but we still have some details to adjust before the formal application, and we will send it in the next couple of weeks. And when this application will be sent, we'll begin the instruction phase by the Commission, and we will start with the preparation phase of the ALTEDIC at the end of the year and early next year. So we will set up the industrial consortium, because as you will see, the EDIC is composed of member states, but it is also actively composed of industries within the European Union. So we are setting up the basis of this consortium. Work on the initiation of the legal hosting entity. The ALTEDIC will be hosted in France, and we will have to prepare the entity at the latest for March or April next year to get it running quickly. And also, when we have done this, we will try to get the international organization status as soon as possible for the EDIC, because the EDIC is, of course, a European structure. So if everything goes well, we hope to get the ALTEDIC up and running before the end of next year. We will start the recruitment of the team maybe in June or something like that next year. So back to next slide. So I will give the floor back to Lucie. No, sorry, this is mine. So just a reminder for the EDIC raison d'être. The raison d'être is really an industry-oriented program, and that's really the main difference with other structures that we have seen the previous year. So one of the key to the success of the program will be the ability to bring the private companies on board. And we are partly working on this point with the help of the LDS, which is now listing the companies in European Union that could have data that could be useful for us. So this is a shared task. And of course, the success of the ALTEDIC will be if we can bring them as much as possible in the ALTEDIC. So the ADIC will be a kind of hub to develop and foster relationships between the industry and the research, because the research is also very important, as you know. And of course, there will be some research in the ALTEDIC through the scientific committee, which can give some advice regarding the scientific matters that we develop. So we really encourage the member states to get closer to their ecosystem and private actors and interested in participating in the project.
Yes, so now I will take back the floor. To explain the main objectives of the ALTEDIC, well, we could say that the first objective is to preserve linguistic and cultural diversity in Europe through the technology. So the ALTEDIC will foster technological leadership and strategic autonomy. In respect of European rules and values, we know that many actors, many stakeholders at the moment in the field of natural language processing and language technologies are from North America or from Asia, so they are not always compliant with expectations of the European. It also aims to foster cooperation between member states. We also think it is really important to raise awareness regarding language technologies and AI in general, mainly towards the general public, but also companies, of course. But towards the general public is something we think is very important because, well, since the explosion of ChatGPT, many people are aware that those technologies exist, that they are very impressive, that they can speak, if we may say, even if it's something I don't like to say, because they do not speak. They align words, which is not exactly the same. But it is important to offer to the general public some ways to understand what is going on and how they can understand, how they can get a grasp of those technologies. And also, as I already mentioned, it is a matter of preserving linguistic diversity. The scope of the EDIC will take into account all languages of the European Union, meaning not only the official languages, but all languages, including regional languages. And it is really important because nowadays, languages that are not able to be used in the digital field are less, well, susceptible to be less used by their speakers. So this is why we need to have some technologies available for all that are spoken throughout Europe. Okay. Yeah, so the main thematic areas of the action plan. So the first area is regarding the existing models. We have already talked a little bit about collecting and storing models in the session. What we aim to do regarding existing models is to gather existing open source language models, offer some fine-tuning actions for existing models for SMEs, because, for example, for some SMEs, it may be difficult to take an already existing open source model, which is big, which is hard to use. They may not have the abilities in the company to appropriate the technology. In the same way of thinking, we also plan on do some reduction and optimization of existing models. We have the example of Bloom. So Bloom is an open source model that was developed by a consortium of more than 1,000 researchers with quite a strong support from the French government. And also, we would like to emphasize the importance of evaluation, certification, and normalizations methodologies, because it is not always very well understood as an important phase of work for the development and for the development of language models. The second area is the development of new models. So we plan to launch new open source model projects, including models with multimodal capabilities. So models that take prompts and output images, videos, or any other kind of media that is not language. We also plan on working with the joint undertaking Euro-HPC for the coordination of action of the European sovereign supercomputer, because GPU is very important for all the actions planned in the LTDIC, and also provide logistical and operational support for public and private experts. So companies, institutions, non-governmental organizations that are working with models. The third area is regarding the data. The LTDIC will have a role as a central platform for European language resources. However, we have had a very interesting talk from Stelios just before, explaining what is the LDS. And the EDIC and the LDS are planned to work hand in hand very closely and to work together with, the LDS will have a stronger focus on data, but the EDIC will probably have to play a role in this matter also. So this goes, what goes under that is to work on the collection of quality data sets and the creation of data, which is really important. As I said, the EDIC will be working in multilingual content. And for example, for some languages of Europe, it is very difficult to gather enough data because, enough data to train models, because there is simply not enough production of the language. So we have to think about that. We have to think of ways to tackle this problem, and this is one of the aim of the EDIC. So the fourth area is the ecosystem. The first action we think is really important is to host a startup incubator. This is something that came from an idea we had in France, because we thought that in France we have a lot of very talented people working in NLP and language technology fields, but not many of them try to create the company, build startups and things like that. So we saw that with a startup incubator we could provide some interesting conditions, interesting means of actions for people that would encourage them to create companies. We also plan to develop and foster relationships between industry and research, which is really important, I think, we think, in the actual situation. Act as a key player of the European Coordinated Plan on AI, bring together and strengthen the LT community throughout Europe, and be kind of the main place for language technology around Europe. Provide dedicated support to institutions for investing in language technologies. Also, this also comes from a situation we saw in France. ChatGPT some institutions, public institutions, have become aware of what language technologies can do, and suddenly they discovered they had some very interesting data that they never used for anything. And the first idea was, well, let's get let's use ChatGPT to take advantage of the data. And this is really problematic for us, because this means that this data that is created by institutions in France and in a broader context in Europe is not useful, well, is not used for the benefit of Europe. So we hope that we will be able to offer a platform for those institutions to direct them to European companies and, well, keep a little bit of sovereignty on this matter. And also, last but not least, the cultural program based on AI for languages. As I said, this is linked to the awareness rising regarding AI. Well, AI is a big thing at the moment, and we think that taking people into the field of AI through language is really a good way of getting them on board on this subject, because for example, a lot of people have heard about blockchain, but blockchain is not something that many people will be using in their everyday life. However, everyone uses a smartphone, almost. Everyone uses search engines, and everyone talks simply. So this is a really easy and quite clear way to get people on board with AI and offer them a way to understand better. And for example, for young people, to make them think that if they can actually get in this career, they are able, well, they have to work on mathematical skills and things like that, but it is not just something that is scary, that will steal jobs and only negative things like that.
Okay, so now let's focus on the member states and the observers of the ALTEDIC. So as you can see, for now, there are 12 member states and 6 observers. Just for your information, the main difference between both status is that observers can attend the Assembly of Members, but they don't have the right to vote nor to benefit and exploit the results obtained by the ALTEDIC. They can be observers for a period of 3 years, but they can reapply for renewal of their status only once. Now about financing the EDIC. The EDIC is funded by 2 sources. On one hand, by the member states, and on the other hand, by the European funding. This funding is not only about money. In-kind contributions are very important too. So as you can see, there are several European funding programs on the digital team. Just for the timeline of the edict, we are currently collecting the commitments of the member states, while most of the European funding will come next year through calls for projects, for example. But the main point to remember about the funding is that the EDIC is especially structured in order to receive different sources of funding. It's like kind of like a connecting point of both the member states and Europe's efforts. Now about the place, the ALTEDIC headquarters will be hosted near the Cité Internationale de la Langue Française, which will take in the Renaissance Castle of François Ier in Villars-Cotterêts. Villars-Cotterêts is a city of around 11,000 inhabitants in the north of Paris, so it's very easily accessible by car or by regional trains. Just for the record, Villars-Cotterêts is the city where the famous French novelist Alexandre Dumas was born, and it's also the city of the ordinance of Villars-Cotterêts, which called for the use of French instead of Latin in all legal acts. So it's a highly symbolic city for the language, and the castle of François Ier, so it's the king behind the ordinance, has been restored for the occasion. This castle will host the museum dedicated to the French language and the languages of France, but also different parallel projects depending on the availability. And talking about parallel projects, France supports another project linked to the EDIC, which is LangIA. So LangIA is a collaborative project to implement a national policy about automatic French and France's languages processing. So this project aims to federate the players in the natural language processing field in order to drive a public policy on the subject. To put it in a nutshell, the goal of LangIA is to boost the creation of tools able to interpret and synthesize text or audios in French and in France's languages in order to preserve and promote linguistic diversity. So this project holds a national perspective on many aspects, as you can see, from the birth of projects with, for example, the business startup support, to the development of what already exists by raising awareness or by promoting the subject. And finally, it also focuses on the evolution of the NLP field. And Thibault, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Lucie and Jocelyn, for this presentation. So, Philippe, I think we are over with the presentation. I hope we haven't took too much time.
Thanks a lot, Thibault. No, not at all. The timing is just perfect. You also have accumulated a number of very interesting questions. The time will go from top to bottom, if you don't mind. One is, can a member state that is not currently observer or member join as an observer or member? I will do it one by one. Don't worry.
Okay, so the answer is yes. If we receive your participation before, let's say, about a few days before the end of the month, we can consider this participation or observership right at the funding stage, so before we apply formally to the European Commission. And of course, if you send us your participation after that, we can add you as a member, but only next year when the Altedic will be up and running.
Second question. Thank you for the clarity, Thibault. What will be able to use the service of the EDIC? Who will be able to use the service of the EDIC? Are there different conditions for members, observers, and third parties? And then I think that there is a mix between the.
Yeah, the answer is a bit complicated because there are different levels of information, data, and software, and or the tools. So mainly, the Altedic is contributing to common knowledge and data. So most of what it will produce will be available to everyone, including every users. So that's the first important point. Some specific resources may be only available to Altedic members. Including, for example, some specific data sets or other resources that are shared internally within the Altedic by its members. So let's say that if you are observer, you may not have access to everything that is available to all the members. If you want to get access to everything that is shared inside the Altedic, you have to become a full participant.
Okay. Can this type of public organization, coalition, keep up with the private sector? Or is the idea different? Aren't you just competing?
Yeah, I think that the Altedic is not in competition with the private sector. Of course, the Altedic is here to support and help the European industry. So his role is to give advice, support, GPU time, resources, help for the companies that wish to develop some NLP projects. So we are not in the competition, and Altedic will not offer commercial services. It will be here to help the industry. And one of the features that we will be developing very soon is to set up some kind of help desk to get the companies in relation with specialists and experts to guide them through various matters of NLP work, and including, of course, access to GPU time.
Then maybe a last question, which is not an easy one actually. Will the Altedic be interested in non-natural language application of large language models? For instance, biomolecular genetic structure described by letters, language-like style.
Well, that's an interesting question. I will give you my opinion on this, and maybe Lucy can complete. I don't think the Altedic will have to work on something else than natural language, even if it may cover or help some various projects with some specific NLP tasks. So maybe this is kind of possibility that the Altedic cooperates with other agencies or European structures that are dealing with NLP, but I don't think that anything other than a natural language should be worked as a priority in the Altedic. We will have so much to do with all the language we have in Europe. Lucy mentioned the 24 official languages, but there are many more, of course. There are the regional languages of every country. So if we can deal with all of them, it will be great. And yeah, maybe the other non-natural language can come after that. Lucy, I don't know if you want to add something.
Yeah, just to complete, yeah, I think we already have a lot on our plates. However, well, first of all, I think there are already some other edicts that are being set up on the subject that have been mentioned. So maybe edicts will be discussing between them. I don't know. This is something that we would have to plan. Just to maybe give an exception is out of natural language processing is maybe artificial language processing will be something that will be easy to work on, because as we have seen with many model developments lately, it seems that models can really easily and quite autonomously, if I can say, learn how to code. So if it is easy and we do not have to invest a lot of it, why not? Plus, well, it makes sense actually, because artificial languages, there is a connection with natural languages, I would say. So we do not close the gates, but this is not a main focus at the moment.
Thank you, Lucy, Jocelyn, and Thibault. I think that it might be time now to close the session. There has been a few other questions, but it has been answered along the presentation. I think it's like, what is the relation between the LTDIC and the language data space? What is the ideal case scenarios outcome for this ethic? I think that you presented at least some of the hint of how the overlap are going to do. What is important to understand, I think, is that everything is still in the making. So we are working all together in order to ensure that we are in synchronization, we are in synergy, we are not fighting one against the other, but really finding synergies in between. It's also important to understand that the LTDIC is really an endeavor at the member state level. So as you presented in the slide, a bunch of that's not nice. Yeah, but bunch is nice as well. It's a large number of member states have contributed too, but we are still eager trying to push from a commission point of view, and I'm sure that from the coordination point of view, to onboard as much member state as possible. So it's also a call to open that one. And on these very nice words, I'm going to close the session. I'm going to really thanks all the participants. I think it's provided a very nice panel of existing platform, thanks to Marcus, and existing, but from an administration angle. You have also Christian, which provided the future of what's going to happen in AI. You have Stelios with the language data space endeavor that we're organizing, and our French colleague with the Altedic one. I think it's provided a very nice panel of platforms that are providing around language technologies. And on this very nice words. I'm going to close the shop. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye
you,
bye.
everyone.
Thank you.